Is there anything I love more in the world than myself? Well, the answer to that question is yes. I love being right. And once again, I called it. I told you everything that was going to happen at last night's debate, and it happened. And remember the situation they were all in. Because I've heard a lot of people talking today about this came off too angry or that candidate came off too angry. It's not just anger, it's desperation. Remember, Super Tuesday is coming. And if Bernie Sanders clean sweeps Super Tuesday, which as of right now, I looked at the polls again this morning, there's a good chance Bernie Sanders does clean sweep all the states on Super Tuesday. This primary is over. That's the fat lady singing, say goodnight. The primary's already over. So what you saw on that stage last night was a bunch of candidates who knew that. You don't have forever. You don't have 3 months. Well, it's going to be decided at the convention. If Bernie Sanders clean sweeps it, say goodnight, and they all knew it. That's why you saw all those candidates yelling except for one, which I was very, very right about, but we'll get into that in a second. Joe Biden especially. Now, before I show you this Joe Biden clip, remember the situation that he's in. Obviously, Joe Biden is not a good politician. Frankly, he sucks. We all can see the fact that he sucks. He's a walking gaffe machine. We know this. But he did get into the race as the presumptive frontrunner. He's now down. Severely down and free-falling. He's losing donors. He's losing support. He is, again, declaring himself to be in North Carolina when he's actually in South Carolina. He's calling supporters fat. He's yelling at reporters. He's patting people in the chest too hard. He is a grease fire. However, he is still a human being, which means he has some amount of pride left in that body. So I anticipated, as I told you yesterday, Joe Biden would come out swinging last night, and yeah, Joe Biden came out swinging.
The fact is, here's the deal. I'm not out of time. You spoke over time, and I'm going to talk. Here's the deal. We've got to deal with the institutional racism.
Vice President. Mr. Vice President.
I know how you cut me off all the time, but I'm not going to be quiet anymore, okay?
Now, because it's Joe Biden, swinging doesn't always mean nice and honest and factual, because his gun stats seem to be just a little bit off.
150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability. More than all the wars, including Vietnam, from that point on.
Yeah, 150 million people is more than like all the wars ever for every country. So clearly he misspoke there. But look, Joe Biden was fired up, and it got a nice applause from the audience. And I saw one of these nerds did one of those long word count things where they tried to figure out, you know, who spoke the most, who did this, who did that. Joe Biden actually spoke more than anybody else. He was extremely assertive last night, which is good, because at the previous debate, he looked like a little mouse up there for the first half of it. I forgot he was even in. Frankly, I think Joe Biden was the story of last night's debate. And as much as this shocks me, I think he may have put himself back in the game. Now, we're not going to know that until South Carolina and until Super Tuesday. We're not going to know whether he actually did anything significant. After all, it's a debate. Mostly it's just political nerds like you and me watching it. But I think he really helped himself. For once, for the first time that I've seen up there on the debate stage, he actually looked presidential. He actually looked like somebody who could stand on the stage with Donald Trump. And rest assured, Democrats may all be insane, but that is what they're looking for. They're looking for somebody who can stand on stage and take on Donald Trump. They hate Donald Trump. Understandably, he's the opposite. But right now, they don't see that. And that's why I told you last debate when Amy Klobuchar got up on stage and she got really rattled when they challenged her about forgetting the name of the Mexican president. And she turned to Pete Buttigieg and said, "Are you calling me stupid, Pete?" And she sounded like a 14-year-old girl. I told you that was a bigger deal than you thought. Why? Because it didn't look presidential, and it didn't look like somebody who was going to be able to stand on the stage and trade blows with Donald Trump. Back to something I said in the very beginning of this show about being right. Oh, yeah. What did I tell you Elizabeth Warren was going to do last night, people? And why did I tell you she was going to do it? You remember. What did I say? I told you Elizabeth Warren was going to leave Bernie Sanders alone, and she was going to blast away at Mike Bloomberg. Why? Well, it's not just because she hates Mike Bloomberg and she's a horrendous nag. The truth of the matter is Elizabeth Warren is bucking hard to be Bernie Sanders' vice president, at least be his vice presidential pick, because she's never going to be vice president. Well, it makes all the sense in the world for her to do what she did, blast away at what is thought to be the main opponent of Bernie, so Bernie doesn't have to. And oh boy, did she ever.
At least I didn't have a boss who said to me, kill it, the way that Mayor Bloomberg
never
is alleged
said
to
that.
have said to one of his pregnant employees. People want a chance to hear. People want a chance to hear from the women who
I
have
never
worked.
said that.
Senator Warren, that is a very serious charge that you leveled at the mayor.
Yes.
You told a woman to get an abortion. What evidence do you have of that?
Her own words.
And Mayor Bloomberg, could you respond to this?
I never said it. Period. End of story.
Okay, first of all, before we get to Bloomberg's response to what Elizabeth Warren just said, there are lines in politics you can and cannot cross. And don't look, I love the fact that politics is a contact sport, and it is a vicious game, and people bring up awful things all the time. I wouldn't actually be totally surprised, especially because of how he is, to hear Mike Bloomberg file a lawsuit against Elizabeth Warren. You're going to levy an accusation like that against one of the richest men on the planet on that stage. The guy has an army of lawyers. Elizabeth Warren better lawyer up. Bloomberg responded.
And what the senator did suggest was that we release these women from the non-disclosure agreement. I did that 2 days later, and my company has said we will not use non-disclosure agreements ever again. The senator has got it, and I don't know what else she wants us to do.
Oh, I'll be clear.
We're following exactly what she asked to do.
I'll tell you exactly
and the
what I
trouble
want you to
is, with this senator, enough is never enough for what this. I'm going to start focusing on some of these other things. We just cannot continue to relitigate this every time.
Which brings us to Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders walked into that race last night as the front runner. And frankly, remember what I told you, debates aren't about how you did at the debate. Debates are about how you did at the debate versus what you needed out of the debate. Bernie Sanders walked in as the front runner, took some shots last night because they started blasting away at him as they should have. But still, he walked up on stage, he did his normal, give everything away, and didn't die. And that's all Bernie Sanders needs out of that, ladies and gentlemen. That's all he needed. So I heard a lot of people today saying Bernie had a bad night because they blasted away at him. But the truth of the matter is, Bernie didn't need to have a good night. Bernie is in the lead by a long shot. You gotta catch me. I don't gotta worry about that. Here's Bernie's comments on Cuba. And before they play this, I want you to listen. Listen to the crowd's reaction when Bernie talks about Cuba. This is something you've never heard before. Listen.
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education. Yes, I think, really? Really?
Yes, because there's no comparing those two
What Barack Obama said is they made great progress on education and health care. That was Barack Obama.
You hear that? Boos. Boos for Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie, when is the last time you heard Bernie get booed at a debate? I saw already people were claiming that Bloomberg paid people to get into the debate and boo Bernie. One, that obviously could be true. Knowing Bloomberg, it probably is true. But two, get ready for Democrats who are not Mike Bloomberg to be chasing that ghost from now until Bloomberg is out of this race, whether he's the nominee or not. Anything bad that happens to another candidate, they're always going to bring up Mike Bloomberg and Mike Bloomberg's money. And what that tells you is the fact that Bloomberg walked into the race with Fort Knox in his back pocket has created some resentment, as it would amongst the candidates. Because having run for office twice myself and lost twice, we don't need to talk about that. Let me tell you something, people. The worst thing about running for office is not the speeches and the pancake breakfasts. And the worst thing about running for office is raising money. And you have to do it all the time. All the time. When you're not on television, even those big shots on their private jets and the speeches and the fancy hotels, they are on the phone. They are at places asking people for money, and that sucks. Pretty much nobody likes asking anybody for money. And therefore, when you have someone like Bloomberg who jumps in It's going to create resentment when he doesn't ever have to make that phone call. Mike Bloomberg is hopping on one of his multiple private jets, which is kind of funny because he's the big climate change guy, and flying all over the country, and he doesn't have to talk to a donor if he doesn't want to. You know why? Because he is the freaking donor. Life is good if you're Mike Bloomberg. But back to the booing thing for Bernie, it may be a bigger deal than you think. What you're seeing there may be the first chink in Bernie's armor of support, because I've never seen that, and you certainly have never seen that at a debate. Bernie gets up there, says a couple nice things about Cuba. He got booed. Yikes. All right, we got a really fun show for you. We have some Second Amendment talk. We got Cam Edwards. All of that may have made you uncomfortable, but I'm right. Oh, by the way, quick programming note. The First will air a 1-hour special on the coronavirus. It's called Preparing for Pandemic. Mike Slater is hosting, and it'll premiere Friday at 6 p.m. right here on The First. Do not miss it. We really do not spend enough time talking about the Democrat strategy, the Democrat platform on guns, on the Second Amendment. And I have to tell you, it's always going to be on my mind. It's always going to be something I talk about here on this show because it creeps me out. I mean, there are so many Democrat policies that I find are wrong. I mean, you talk about something like abortion, I think it's way more than wrong. Wrong isn't a strong enough word to put it. But you talk about guns, I find it to be creepy. And here's why I find it to be creepy. You're a party that constantly wants to grow the government. I want government to do more of this. I want government to control this. The government should control your car and your light bulbs and your health care and control. And at the same time, universally, across the board, they don't want you to be able to defend yourself. On top of that, none of their statistics, none of their, gun rhetoric is backed up by any fact whatsoever. None of it. The truth of the matter is that the cities in this country with the strictest anti-gun laws, that's where all the murders happen. The truth is that every place in the world, every place in the United States of America that is designated as a gun-free zone, that's where the vast majority of mass shootings happen. Do you remember that mass shooting at the gun show? Yeah, neither do I, because there's never been one. I don't understand that. Why? If guns are the issue, and there are guns all over every single table, and everybody's carrying a gun, why isn't there a mass shooting there? Because guns are not the problem. And that's the thing. I'm preaching to the choir when I talk to you about that, but they know that too. All these statistics, all these facts about guns and guns not being the problem and guns being the ones that protect people, they know that. And yet they remain completely committed to disarming you. And when I say creepy, that's what I mean. You want to control my life and you want to disarm me? And you don't think I'm going to be a little bit suspicious about that? I'm very suspicious about that. And I mean, listen to this rhetoric from people like Joe Biden. This is in no way grounded in fact at all.
And the second one is on dealing with firearms. It is irrational, with all due respect to the governor of Texas, irrational what they're doing. On the very day you see a mass shooting, I guess the numbers now, I was on a plane the last 2.5 hours, I think up to 5 killed. And we're talking about loosening access to have guns, be able to take them into places of worship, store them in school. I mean, it's just absolutely irrational. It's totally irrational. And it's
That's funny because Jack Wilson, just a few weeks, I believe, after that video took place, pulled out his weapon because he was carrying in church and shot a mass shooter in the face, thus saving lives. And let me tell you all something else. Learn to use a weapon safely first, then learn to be fast and accurate with it, and carry your weapon in your place of worship, whether that be church, synagogue, mosque, or wherever you go off to worship. You are vulnerable there. Why? Because they think you're unarmed there. It's time we start letting mass shooters know that is not a place with a bunch of sheep in it. That is a place with a bunch of wolves in it. Do not enter the door. You see all these mass shooters, we like to write them off and say, he's crazy, he's crazy, he's crazy. Yeah, a lot of them might be crazy, but they're not dumb. They walk in places with people who are defenseless for a reason. They're not shooting up gun shows. They're not shooting up the police department for a reason. And again, I'll circle back to what I said before. Joe Biden knows that. Joe Biden's been around long enough to know that. And yet he still really wants to disarm us. Or they say this stupid nonsense about these tiny little steps that are idiotic, like smart guns.
Lastly, we should have smart guns. No gun should be able to be sold unless your biometric measure could pull that trigger. Our enemy is the gun manufacturers, not the NRA, the gun manufacturers.
For one, the gun manufacturers, those are American businesses that employ Americans. And when I see somebody who's running to be the United States president using the rhetoric that Joe Biden uses all the time on the campaign trail, talking about putting them out of business, talking about I'm coming for you, and using words like that, I find that to be extremely authoritarian and creepy. Two, biometric. It should be a smart gun. Ladies and gentlemen, most of you have a phone of some kind, and most of your phones, or at least you've seen someone who has a phone that has the little thumbprint scanner. Yes, that's right. That's my face on my own phone. Isn't that beautiful? You know how often that thumbprint scanner on your phone doesn't work? A lot. You know why it doesn't work sometimes, ladies and gentlemen? Because your hand sometimes is too sweaty. Do you know what happens when you get nervous? Your hands get sweaty. Do you think you might be nervous when you're pulling out your weapon to defend yourself in your home after someone just broke in? You really want to bank on that? That is honestly the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my entire life. And again, let me repeat for the 10,000th time this segment, Joe Biden knows that. Yet he proceeds anyway. Here's Bernie.
In 1988, Rachel, when it wasn't popular, I ran on a platform of banning assault weapons and, in fact, lost that race for Congress. And I believe that what we need is comprehensive gun legislation that, among other things, provides universal background. We end the gun show loophole. We end the straw man provision. And I believed in 1988, and I believe today.
Again, there is no gun show loophole. That's been proven time after time to be a complete farce. That's not a thing that actually exists. We already have background checks for weapon. Again, that's not a thing that exists. And what exactly is an assault weapon? I mean, I own some weapons. Not a single one of them is designed for anything else but assault. It's a weapon. That's why they call it a weapon. And we as a nation were founded on the fact that citizens are allowed to have them. Why? Because we were worried about authoritarians becoming president one day. That's why. Now, Joe Biden, you listen to this and you tell me, we talk all the time about Castro and all these other dictators, and we don't like it when they do horrible things to private citizens and force people to do things. Listen to Joe Biden, the moderate in the race. Does this sound authoritarian to you?
A guy has 12 assault weapons with bump stocks, which means you can fire it faster, you pull the trigger faster, and 100 rounds. Why in God's name should anyone be able to own that? It's just wrong. And we've got to, and I promise you, as president, I am going to get these guys. I want to let them know. Promise you. I'm the only guy that's beaten the gun manufacturer. I'm the only guy that's beaten the NRA nationally, and I did it twice nationally. And gun manufacturers, I'm coming for you. Period.
That's creepy, for one. Two, I actually agree with something Joe Biden said. There is absolutely no reason for you to own 100 rounds. You should own a lot more than that. Michael Bloomberg, he, of course, is the anti-gun nut, which I think it loses him the general election once he gets there. Here's his new ad.
Now, we have a duty, and that is to rid our streets of guns. Congress should also be doing more to stop illegal gun sales before they occur. Together, we put the issue of illegal guns back on the national agenda. Our coalition of mayors is also urging Congress to close the gun show loophole. Giving people the right to be safe and not to be killed on their streets is what the elected officials' primary job is. Since the Sandy Hook massacre, more than 100 mayors from across the country have joined our bipartisan coalition. We say that's enough, it's never going to happen again, but someday, one time, it is going to stop. More than 20 states have strengthened their gun laws over the past 2 years, so let's get out there and keep working, keep fighting, and keep winning.
It's all of them, people. 25 candidates running to be president on the Democrat ticket, and every single one of them wants to take your ability to defend yourself. Creepy. BearingArms.com's Cam Edwards, show favorite, joins us next. Hang on. Cam Edwards is our resident gun guy, so we go to him whenever we want to talk about this subject because, frankly, he's forgotten more about guns than I'll ever know. So BearingArms.com's Cam Edwards joins me now. Cam, we did a whole bunch of various gun quotes in the last segment about the various candidates, but this is more of a broader topic in that of all the positions they take, I have some that I really disagree with and some that I think are flat out evil. Their gun positions are the ones that creep me out the most because they're the party that wants to control everything and disarm me. Am I just being paranoid about that? But I'm telling you, man, that sounds really creepy to me.
No, I think it is, part of a broader, package there, right? It's one thing to have all of these programs that would expand the power and the scope of government. But when you start talking about stripping people of their most basic fundamental rights, in the name of safety, by the way, that is creepy. And, look, unfortunately right now, it looks like the race for the presidential nomination is basically between the guy who likes Cuban communism and the guy who likes Chinese communism. And unfortunately, in neither Cuba nor China can the average resident own firearms because the government doesn't trust them with guns. And that's what this comes down to. These are candidates who don't trust the American people to exercise their basic fundamental rights. And I don't trust any politician who doesn't trust me.
Oh, amen. Amen to that. And when did this happen as far as it being a universal Democrat platform, Cam? Because I got to be honest, I mean, even Bill Clinton sucked on guns. He wasn't near what these guys were or are, was he?
Well, I mean, I don't know. You could say he had the Clinton gun ban. He went after firearms manufacturers, hoping to try to bankrupt them. So, yeah, he was pretty bad. But after he lost, Democrats thought to themselves, okay, this is a really loser issue. We're going to stay away. We're going to maybe make some happy noises about gun control, but it's not going to be one of our big priorities. And it really wasn't until 2012. And I think the Sandy Hook massacre was really a turning point for the gun control movement. It certainly invigorated a lot of suburban moms who were swing voters in a lot of suburban districts, right? And they said, this is an issue that concerns me because we just saw these little kids get murdered in an elementary school, and I don't want that to happen to my kid. And I understand that. But gun control advocates, I think, took advantage of that visceral emotional response. And they said, look, we will promise to protect your kids. All we have to do is get rid of the guns. All we have to do are take these, quote unquote, common sense gun safety measures. But their idea of gun safety is don't own a gun. And Michael Bloomberg was there to, help expand this message and promote this message to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars back in anti-gun candidates and his anti-gun agenda. And really, I think that has been sort of the turning point in terms of gun control being a politically acceptable thing and now a politically mandatory thing for Democrats. It's a position that you must hold if you are a Democrat running for president today.
Cam, how much traction have they gotten? I mean, you mentioned Sandy Hook, and honestly, that was, maybe the worst day I've ever had as an American citizen. That was a rough one there. But you mentioned Sandy Hook. Did we officially lose the gun control argument then? Is gun control something politically viable? I always just assumed this was still that third rail that, yeah, you can yell about it a little in a Democrat primary, but you better shut your mouth about it in the general or you can't win. Mike Bloomberg does not appear to be somebody who's going to back off of gun control anytime soon.
No, he's not, and neither is Joe Biden, who said Monday night that he's coming after gun manufacturers. Of course, he also said he was running for U.S. Senate, so I don't know how seriously to take Biden's comments. But, Bernie Sanders has said he's going to ban, quote-unquote, assault weapons. And they're all serious. And if they have the power to do this, they will absolutely enact their agenda. But no, I don't think that the issue is lost. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I think that more and more Americans understand that these are empty promises. the promises for safety. But if you look at what's happened in places like Colorado, they passed gun control after the Aurora shootings in 2012. So they passed universal background checks. They passed a magazine ban. Violent crime has increased by more than 25% in Colorado since then. 2013, in response to Sandy Hook, Maryland passes the Firearm Safety Act. You've got a quote-unquote assaultman's ban, gun registration, universal background checks, and more. And Baltimore has seen historically record-setting homicide rates, I think 4 of the 5 years, since this law has been put on the books. So Americans can see that these are empty, false promises. And what I think we need to be doing is we need to be offering up the real better solution, the constitutionally sound solution, but also the more effective solution to preventing these types of mass shootings, as well as the everyday gang and drug violence that drives crime in places like Baltimore and St. Louis and Chicago.
I understand that we have withstood, an onslaught, especially when it comes to school shootings. Like you mentioned, every one of these groups on the left pounces on them before they are even counting the dead bodies of the kids. They're all grabbing for guns. But I actually don't feel like we've lost ground there as far as school safety goes. Is it just in my head? I feel like we've actually gained ground there. I know we got a great law passed in Florida. I feel like we've gotten better as far as our messaging.
I think some of that may be because of where you live. Texas has been really, really good on this issue in terms of school safety, and there are hundreds of school districts that have armed school staff. But, it's sort of a mixed bag, I think, around the country. These types of decisions are typically done at the local level. And so while you've had a number of districts in states like Ohio and Colorado and elsewhere that have really paid attention to school safety, I think, sadly, in some other districts, you've seen their idea of improving school safety is holding these lockdown drills, freaking kids out, and doing nothing to actually prepare the adults, as to how they should respond if, God forbid, there's an attack in their school.
Cam Edwards, bearingarms.com. Thank you for some time today, my friend.
You bet, man. I'll see you at CPAC later this week.
See you then. See you, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody wants to hang out with me. All right, we're not done yet. Hang on. Joining me now is the Senior Policy Analyst for the Independent Women's Forum, Inez Stepman. Inez, what is this Equal Rights Amendment? Don't you want to be equal? You look like you're opposed to this thing.
Well, obviously, I'm just opposed to equality, and that's why I'm here. No, the Equal Rights Amendment is a not well-named amendment. So the basic idea is that we're going to replace the equality under the law that women already have and have had for decades and decades in the United States with a sort of interchangeability or sameness between the sexes, where we're going to treat men and women the same, exactly the same in every instance. And of course, that runs afoul not only of common sense, but actually of distinctions, allowing the law to recognize differences between men and women that actually keep women safe, for example. And one example I'd give on that score is probably, for example, we separate men and women in prisons because obviously that's why anybody who thinks about it for 3 seconds can understand why we separate men and women in prisons. But that's a discrimination based on sex and on face value. Those kinds of distinguishing laws between men and women could be constitutionally infirm if we actually go ahead and ratify the Equal Rights Amendment.
What actually is in the Equal Rights Amendment? Because like you said, they, of course, like they always do, they put a great name on that. Well, of course, who doesn't want equal rights? What's actually in the thing?
So it's a blanket ban on any kind of what's called discrimination on the basis of sex. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? It sounds like something that we should all be in favor of. Indeed, when you look at polls, you see 80-90+% of the American people believe that basic legal equality between men and women is a good thing. But then when you realize that the legal term discriminate doesn't mean what we use in sort of regular parlance, right, to mean something invidious and bad, but any kind of distinguishing or recognizing of the fact that men and women might actually be different and treating them differently in any circumstance might be a good idea. You have a beginning, you can begin to realize how radical this amendment is, right? So I gave you the example of men's and women's prisons, but we could also talk about, for example, restrooms in public schools, or we could talk about all kinds of programs that distinguish between men and women. For example, spousal Social Security, even though it doesn't say that spousal Social Security is only for women and it includes men, the vast majority of recipients are in fact women. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, among other proponents, has suggested that even a program like that, that's facially neutral, might be considered a violation of a so-called equality principle. And then in the States, ERA language has been used, for example, to require full funding, taxpayer funding of abortion under a quote-unquote equality principle. So you can see that this can get very radical very quickly, and it's not just a matter of basic legal equality, which, by the way, as I said, we already have protected by state law, protected by federal law, and also protected by the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution.
And as I am obviously a dude and a bit of a chauvinist, you are clearly a sane, logical, one of the smartest women I know, so maybe neither of us are the ones to answer this question, but how much popularity does feminism actually have with the women of America? I mean, obviously you can hear them because clearly the harpies are screeching the loudest, but is it some tiny percentage that's screaming from the rooftops? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? How much percentage does feminism have as far as popularity goes?
So not very much, right? So if you ask American women, anywhere from about 1/3 to 40% of American women identify as feminists. And that's not overall, that's women, right? So presumably a lower percentage of men identify as feminists, although I'm never sure anymore. And that's just people who identify as any type of feminist, right? And oftentimes feminism finds itself running up against the very real, revealed preferences of women. So I'll give you a couple examples of that. Right. The first is that consistently in surveys, women with young children say that their ideal situation is to work part-time or not at all. Right. This is something that a lot of the literature that is put out by feminists just doesn't recognize. I don't mean like novels. I mean academic literature. It just doesn't recognize that this is actually something that women prefer. And likewise, when we talk about the pay gap, for example, the pay gap is almost certainly due to women's choices, and not just the choice to require more flexibility, more balance between home life and work, but also just what majors women find interesting. So, for example, petroleum engineering is nearly 4-to-1 men in that major, right? Whereas sociology is basically the opposite. Well, it turns out that people with a sociology major get paid less later in life than people who went into petroleum engineering. But that doesn't mean that they're discriminating against women in petroleum engineering. It just means that perhaps women on average would prefer to go into a field that's more interpersonal, that connects more with people. Women tend to like less the idea of being in a cubicle 15 hours a day without interacting with other people. These are natural differences between men and women, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that we make different choices on aggregate. But time and time again, the feminist movement uses these disparities to point to some kind of discrimination or patriarchy or some kind of top-down force that is keeping women from acting exactly like men, when in reality, and common sense tells us that in fact just women don't act like men because men and women are different, and that's fine.
And as I have a Mike Bloomberg theory. You've seen what I've seen, all the Mike Bloomberg audio being dumped on him over the past week.
I actually love it. I am the last person on the planet to not see any of the Mike Bloomberg ads. I don't know what it is about my algorithm. I have never been served a Mike Bloomberg ad.
Well, not the ads, the opposition research they're dumping on him. All the old video of him talking about stop and frisk, and they've got him dancing in some kind of weird outfit. Either way, long story short, they're dumping a lot on him. And my theory is this, that it's very good for Bloomberg, and they're going to make him the nominee. People forget what it was like during the GOP primary when Trump was there and everything else, and everybody screamed about Trump 24 hours a day, and Trump's the devil, and Trump's divorces, and Trump this, and Trump that, and Trump, without realizing it. They made it all about Trump. The whole race was about Trump, and I think the Democrats are going to do the same thing about Bloomberg.
I don't think it plays the same way in the Democratic primary. I think they are much more sensitive to these sorts of things than the Republican electorate. I'm pretty skeptical of Bloomberg actually being able to take the slings and arrows. Look, we've been wrong a lot before, and politics is a wild ride these days. But I'm very skeptical of the idea that Bloomberg is going to sweep in there, former Republican billionaire, and to be able to capture the energy of the Democratic Party. I think Bernie is much more in line with where the average Democrat is. Now, obviously, I think that that's a tragedy that we have an octogenarian communist who may very well capture one of the two major nominations in the United States. But that's honestly where I think the Democratic Party is. I think they're a lot closer to Bernie than they are to Bloomberg. And Bloomberg has this off-putting, I think more than the quote-unquote offensive things that he said, he has this off-putting sort of elitist veneer where there's the comments that he made, for example, about how he could teach anybody to farm. And I don't think that that's really in the zeitgeist of either party these days. We have both parties undergoing populist earthquakes, right? Where we're shifting the very basic principles of what the two parties stand for, both in the populist direction. And I just don't see a room in this particular dynamic for an ex-Republican billionaire who has really weird problems with soda and straws. I don't think that's where the country's at. But hey, I've been wrong before, and I wouldn't be surprised to be wrong again.
You have been wrong before. I can't imagine what that must be like. Inez Stepman, Independent Women's Forum, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Let me tell you what we're all going to do tonight. Hang on. Mike Bloomberg has been catching some heat lately from President Trump because, well, President Trump keeps calling him Mini Mike and making fun of his height. And there are all these pictures going around out there of people taking pictures with Mike Bloomberg. And Mike Bloomberg is really short. He's really short. And there's this complete lie going around, I should say, in society that the worst thing in the world is to be a short dude. That's not true. The worst thing in the world is to be a short dude and then lie about it. In 2001, Newsday reported that Bloomberg had listed his height as 5'10" on his driver's license. Yeah, maybe if you're standing on a stool, Mike. Then the New York Times in December released a letter from Bloomberg's own doctor that lists his height as 5'7". Boy, Bloomberg, that doctor better be happy it's Bloomberg's doctor and not Hillary Clinton's doctor, or he would have committed suicide a long time ago. Now, Bloomberg has a coolness problem, I guess I should say. The guy has all the money in the world. He just comes off like a jerk, and he has no funniness to him. But to be honest, in his defense, once you go to the left, you're not funny anymore. Why do you think all the late night shows suck now? I mean, all of them. Go down the list. It's all a bunch of lefties making bad Trump jokes that everyone's like, it's just kind of lame. So Bloomberg is putting out these memes. This first one, he's doing these conversations, showing himself having a conversation with somebody, and they're not funny. I mean, half the time, I don't even know what he's trying to do. Look at this one, the Mr. Tank one. Mr. Tank. I mean, just look at that. I've been waiting for my memes so long, I learned how to make memes in myself. And I mean, that's not funny, right? I honestly, I asked my people to send me the rest of it because I was like, yeah, but wait a minute, what's the punchline? Ladies and gentlemen, there is no punchline. Let it be a lesson to you boys and girls, no matter what they're teaching you in school. If you choose to go to the left, you lose your sense of humor. All right, we'll be back to do all this again one more time tomorrow. See you.